Look, I call it the Bermuda Triangle economy, where you're flying through the economy and all of your instruments are spinning in opposite directions. And of course, it's a recipe for total failure and crash.
And they're dumping gold, dumping Bitcoin, dumping sound assets, not realizing that those are the only things that are going to save them when this inflationary holocaust comes. And it's coming.
Max Keiser, time now to turn to Lawrence Lepard. He's a money manager and a hard money advocate. Lawrence, the dollar is soaring against other fiat currencies, but we can tell from inflation numbers that all fiat currencies are in fact collectively tumbling. The death of the dollar has been predicted for decades, but are we finally in the last days of fiat?
Well, yeah, we're certainly near the end of the fiat game. You know, it's hard to know exactly if it's a few months away or a few years away. That's how these things go, as you know. They're volatile, but yeah, there's a short squeeze on the dollar. It's kind of hilarious in my opinion, but I guess given the policies they're pursuing, you would think that might happen right before it dies.
So Lawrence, on February 26th, we froze $600 billion in Russian reserves. Is this kind of the end game? I mean, does China look at this and say, oh boy, our money can be stolen at any time by the U.S.? Where do you see it going from here?
Yeah, well, it's another brick in the wall, right? I mean, this is an incremental process, as I said earlier, of losing confidence in fiat. And you know, if your fiat can be seized by an aggressive government that's trying to play by their own set of rules, you know, you're going to stop using it. And this is why we see China and Russia and Turkey and a number of other countries, you know, doing deals directly in their own currency, and the percentage of world transactions denominated in the dollar is falling rapidly. Fiat is fiat, and it's not just the dollar. The dollar just happens to be the most notable and largest one. So yeah, that's a brick in the wall. You know, I'm sure when that occurred, China, Russia, well, obviously Russia, but you know, China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, India, all these other countries took note. I mean, I've seen India is doing transactions with Russia denominated in Chinese yuan. I mean, what's that all about, right? So yes, we are watching fiat currency die as we speak.
Deglobalization seems to be intensifying, and de-dollarization as well. Where do we go from here?
I'm sure you guys have read it. I bet a lot of your listeners have too. If not, they can Google it and find it. Zoltan Posner really made a great recent paper where he talked about how, you know, these wars have basically broken the globalization system, and now, you know, trust has been lost. And so when trust is lost, people don't want to trade with one another, and supply chains become iffy, and getting, you know, inventory is almost liquidity. And so people have to overbuy in order to make sure they have enough. And that's part of what we see going on right now. You know, that's part of the larger problem associated with fiat currency failing. You know, the wars, I mean, as Posner points out, I mean, you know, we were shipping China cheap dollars and they were shipping us manufactured goods, and Russia was shipping the world cheap commodities and we were shipping them paper. And both, well, started by Russia, but it's being followed somewhat by China. Both are saying, we don't want this paper anymore. You know, these paper dollars aren't any good. So give us an alternative. That's what's occurring. It's very clear to me, Max, I'm sure it is to you as well, that we are in the end game of fiat. You know, fiat will die. We just don't know exactly when. We have to be patient.
So, Lawrence, hundreds of billions of dollars of student debts were just written off. Well, of course, it was just transferred to the taxpayer. I mean, this is essentially moral hazard gone berserk, right? Because why would anyone assume that they would ever have to pay their debts off ever again?
That's right. Look, this started in 2008, right? When we created socialism for the rich by bailing out the banks. You know, that was free money for the wrong people, you know, and then we followed it through with the PPP programs and COVID. And I know a lot of businesses that got huge PPP loans. They didn't need them. They were forgiven. So that was socialism for businesses. And, you know, it's not surprising to me, probably shouldn't be to anyone else either, that students are saying, hey, you know, you're handing out free money. Where's mine? You know, and it starts with the 10,000. It's probably going to grow to a much larger number. I mean, this is a trend, right? And, you know, we see in England and the continent that the energy rates are blowing up, is that, you know, the printer's going burr and it can't stop. And that's why fiat is doomed.
Speaking of energy, when I look at these energy charts, they don't look like they're just, you know, rising due to inflation. And they look absolutely nonsensical. They've gapped open to unheard of historical prices. I mean, it looks crazy, Lawrence. What's going on?
They know that their gasoline cost is higher. They know something's not right. but I don't think they fully understand the depth of the problem and how it's just going to continually get worse. And so, I mean, this is shocking to me. There are actually large pools of money in the world that think we're going back to a 2.6% inflation rate. That ship has sailed. That is not going to happen. We had peak deflation in March of 2020. I mean, the point is that we are now in an inflationary world driven by a combination of the response to COVID and the war in the Ukraine and the implications of seizing the Russian reserves and what China and Russia are doing. And so the world has changed, and yet the entire investment world is still looking in the rearview mirror thinking we're going to go back to that. And they're dumping gold, dumping Bitcoin, dumping sound assets, not realizing that those are the only things that are going to save them when this inflationary holocaust comes. And it's coming. I mean, we're going to have extremely high inflation. We're going to have $150 oil, $200 oil. It's going to be a nightmare. But, you know, right now, because Powell is trying to be, you know, Paul Volcker, which is a joke. I mean, he's a fraction of that guy, but he's trying it because he doesn't have any other choice. And what he's going to do is he's going to crater the market, and then he's going to have to come back and they're going to have to print 10x what they would have printed otherwise. The next Fed print, the last Fed print was billions of dollars, and this next one is going to be multiples of that, in my opinion.
You mentioned quantitative easing there. And the big picture is that you've got central banks that have been quantitatively easing for an extended period of time. As you point out, now they're tightening. Quantitative tightening is kind of a sudden shock to the system. But in fact, we're at a point where it's going to become clear, Lawrence, I'm curious what you think about this, that there is no real way to get inflation rate, as you're talking about there, back to 2.6%, as is indicated by the 5-year swap market, without quantitative easing kicking in a big way and crashing the economy. That's the only way you can get inflation down. But I have a feeling what you're suggesting is that that's really not going to happen. There's no political will for it, and we're going to have a return to a massive money printing.
So in order to create more supply, you've got to spend money on CapEx. If you want to spend money on CapEx, you're weighing it as against the rate of interest that you're paying. Well, if you increase interest rates, that makes it more expensive to spend money on CapEx. So in a backward sense, they're increasing interest rates to fight inflation is not going to really solve a big part of the underlying cause of inflation, which is lack of investment or malinvestment in the wrong things. I mean, for the last 10 years, we have not invested enough in commodities. And we've had these stupid ESG policies, and that's why, the electrical situation in the European continent and England is just so bad, because they've gone in the wrong direction. So we've got to address and solve those problems, and higher interest rates aren't going to help. I mean, higher interest rates are going to definitely slow the economy, and it's going to create some unemployment. I mean, the whole thing is just maddening and sickening. And what they're trying to do, it's like economic whiplash. I mean, they gave away a ton of free money, created this enormous inflation, and they realized they'd made the biggest policy mistake in the history of the Fed. They turned around, they slammed on the brakes, and now we're going to go skidding towards the other side. This is like, these guys are driving a clown car, and they're bouncing it off these two guards. The point is, and they're not even able to do that because, all the dials are going nuts. It's like they're in a plane that's inverted. Once you invert your plane, you lose the pneumatic pressure, and you can't trust your AI indicator anymore. You can't trust, the altimeter starts to unwind. And that's kind of where they're at right now. It's really a mess. As you can tell, I'm kind of pissed off about it.
Oh, right. I think I read that exact phrase. That's a rarely used economic phrase in Jerome Powell's testimony. Look, I call it the Bermuda Triangle economy, where you're flying through the economy and all of your instruments are spinning in opposite directions. And of course, it's a recipe for a total failure and crash. Lawrence Lepard, always great to have you on.